It's now time that we work with CSV files. So what I want to do is store my data in a CSV file that my program eventually will be able to open, read, and send to all the different people that I might need to send it to, send it with the amounts, and all the things that we've done with string substitution as well as email. We want to start with actually learning about how to work with CSV files inside of Python, because you can write them in Python, and these CSV files can be imported into spreadsheets. So you could actually open it in Excel or Numbers, and you can also import CSV files into databases. Now the formats aren't always going to be perfect, and they're not always going to work as well as you might hope, but the concepts are definitely going to be there as far as how we want to see them done. So without talking about it too much, I do want to mention that the documentation actually goes through a good number of this stuff that we're about to do, but I'm going to go through it and actually explain it as we go. And then also we have on our Python 30 Days of Python cheat sheet, we have some stuff that we'll also be using as well. And of course, that's on github.com/codingforentrepreneurs and the 30 Days of Python repository. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open up our terminal, or the Python shell basically. So I'm going to go to, first off, notice I'm in the desktop. I'm going to go ahead and change into the Hungry Pie folder. And this is what I currently have in it. Hopefully you have this too. We're only working in this folder because we're going to be creating a new file, the data.csv file. And that file is going to be in this folder, so then we can put it in our repository. Where we're doing this, it's going to work just in this directory itself. So you can do this anywhere that you have access to with Python. So I'm going to go ahead and type out Python 3 because I'm going to jump in to Python version 3, and I'm going to import CSV. Now I'm going to do something here. I want to create a file called data.csv, and then I want to write something to it. I want to actually put something in this CSV file. And by importing CSV, I can actually use some built-in methods into Python, or built-in functions, that will allow me to write a CSV file and also work with a CSV file. So let's go ahead and do with open, and I'll say data.csv, comma, W plus, I'll explain this in a second, in parentheses as CSV file, colon, and then we're going to space in 4 times. Now what we see here is we say with open, so basically what I'm saying is I'm opening this file here and I'm setting it equal to the variable of CSV file. So with and as are doing that for me. I could use something different than CSV file. You could call it ABC if you want. You can call it whatever you like as long as it doesn't conflict with a Python or pre-existing Python function like open. So open's another Python function, so it's opening this file, and then we have this mode here. I'll describe these modes. You can probably see them in the background here a little bit, but I'll describe these modes in just a second. But this one means to write, read or write, and then overwrite the existing file or create a brand new one. So I'm going to go ahead and say writer. Again, arbitrary variable here, and we'll do csv.writer and csv file. So this line right here is basically the CSV file could be overrode with this in here, but it's nice having that variable that we can use in other instances, which eventually we'll get to. So I'm going to do writer and then writer.write row, and here I can just put a list. So a list of items that I actually want to write in. So this list is going to be based off of the number of columns. So let's say, for instance, I want my header. I'm going to say title, and then I'll say description, right? So this is going to be at the very top of this file. I press enter, and I do writer.write row, parentheses, and I'll say row 1, and then some description. In the brackets, in the parentheses, and we press enter a couple times, and it says 19 and 17. Okay, so let's actually look at our file let's exit out of Python, and we'll look into our directory. And if we list everything out, I see now that I have data.csv. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up and drag this data.csv into Sublime Text. And what we see here in Sublime Text is the first row being title and description, and the second row being row and some description. So it actually created a CSV file, And this can be opened in other places. So if I actually open it up in Numbers, which is built into Windows, or excuse me, into Mac, I see that I have now a table that's actually set up with this stuff. So let's actually do that again. This time I'm going to add another column, and literally I'm going to use the exact same code otherwise, with the exception of adding another column. So I'm going to go ahead and import, or excuse me, let's go into Python 3, and we're going to import CSV, and I'll do with open data.csv, and we'll do w plus as CSV file. Enter, 4 spaces. I'm going to go ahead and copy this stuff over here, or above. 4 spaces again, another copy. I'm going to paste it in here and add another column, so column 3. Press enter, and we're going to write a couple rows now, and some description, another. And let's go ahead and copy that one. Press enter after it. Paste it in here and enter again, and one more time. Now it says 25. Okay, so let's go ahead and look into our folder, and we see that it has the rows here. So what we're getting this right here is actually related to the number of bytes in each row. So each row has 25 bytes in this case, and that equals up to 75 bytes for the total file size. So of course, if you added a lot more data, that's going to go up a lot. But as we see in this little preview, I noticed that the columns are there, and it's kind of working as we might expect. Okay, so now's a good time to talk about these modes. And since all we've been doing so far is writing something, we've also been overwriting that file. So everything that we put in there originally is no longer there, but we are still writing to it. We're still adding to it. So this is where these modes come in. And you can append to a mode by using A instead of using W+. You can read any file by just using R. This means that you can't actually write to it. It will not allow you to write to it. Whereas if you used append, it will actually append to the very end. So let's actually take a look at this with append. So CSV file, this is open in this block. We went out of that block, so I'm going to go ahead and do it again and say with open data.csv. And now I'll say append or A, and then we'll say as CSV file again. And now what I want to do is still the same thing with writer. And this time I'm just going to grab the last row here, but I'm going to make some different data to it, and I'll just say, just change the first part of it, and we'll just say append row, and we'll press enter at the very end of it. And there we go. So that row now has 30 bytes. That was what we actually wrote to it. And if we look into our Finder, we now see that it says append row. Now, of course, if I went back and did the W+, that would actually overwrite everything. Whereas W also does that. So W+ reads and writes, where W only writes. So we did read and write. So let's see what I mean by that. If I go ahead and open this up and now use something called a reader, and we'll say reader equals to csv.reader, and now the CSV file, we can actually go for row in reader. We can print out the row. Do note that I am spacing, like if I go in, this is 8, this is 4, and so on. It's not necessarily perfect, but that's definitely what I'm doing if you were wondering. And I'm going to print out the row. So it doesn't look like it did, so let's actually take a look at the CSV file. And it's empty. So why is it empty? It's empty because the mode that we were in was in read and write. And what I did was, right off the bat, I tried to read something that I actually overwrote. Right? It's gone. It's blank. So it can't read anything and can't print anything out. But that's not actually the way we'd want to do it anyway. So what I'm going to do now is open up Sublime Text. I'm going to create a new file in here, and I'm going to call this rwcsv.py. And of course, you're not going to have to replace it. But now we're going to actually write in some of these things and actually use them for copy and paste so we have a better understanding of how this all works. We did some tests with writing it, but now it's time to do some more. So I'll do import CSV, and we'll do with open. So this first one that we did was data.csv, and we used w plus as CSV file. And then from here we said writer equals to csv.writer and CSV file. And then we wrote a new row, which we first of all had our title row. So we did writer.write row, and that was going to be, table or column 1, and I'll just say column 2. And then we added one more after that of our actual data. So data 1 and data 2. So that's our writing. Let's go into reading. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste below it, and we're going to put this as R, just R, no plus. And now instead of writer, we're going to call this reader and csv.reader. And I'm going to get rid of the right row stuff. And now I can just do for row in reader. We're going to print out the row. So let's go ahead and try this one now. Of course, we want to write stuff to the data. So we're going to go back into Python and let's go ahead and write stuff to the data. Looks like we have. Let's look in here, and now we've got some data in there. And I'm going to go ahead and open and write some, or open and read the data now. And we come in, and now we can actually read the data. Notice it's a list. It's a list item that we can actually go through. Column 1 and column 2, so the title is actually there, and also the actual data. So that's reading and writing. And of course we can have that append function. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy the write portion and just do A for append. And now we can actually add that additional data. I'm going to go ahead and say this is data 3 and 4. And then we just copy that and paste that in. And sure enough, if we look in our data file, we have a new data set. So this isn't bad, but I want to make it a little bit more robust, meaning I don't want it to be a list. I want it to be a dictionary. A dictionary value would make it a little bit nicer on us and just make it overall a lot easier to work with our CSV file. So the first thing I want to do is actually jump into the reader version of it. So pasting all that data down, let's copy the reader, paste that data down. And now we're going to call this dict reader, so dictionary reader, and it's still doing the exact same thing. And let's go ahead and take a look at what this does. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and we're going to paste in here. And I see that it says, look, column 2 data, column 1 data, and column 1, and so on. Right? So this is now giving us that very first row is now considered the dictionary value row, which allows us to do a lot more interesting things. Such as appending to this based off of the value. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, I'm going to copy this append stuff and paste it in here. And now we used dict reader before, we'll use dict writer this time. And now what we can do is actually set up our field names. So we'll say field, above the dictionary writer. So we'll do field names equaling to, well, what are our titles? What they've been is column 1 and column 2. Those aren't very solid titles for an Excel spreadsheet like this. So I'm actually going to change them directly in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to open up that spreadsheet in Sublime Text and change it just to ID and title, right? Arbitrary, but that's what it's going to be. So we'll save that and we'll go back into our Python file for this. So the new field names are ID and title. And notice that they are lowercase. Of course, if we use those original values, you would just copy and paste those into these field names. So once we have this field names list actually set up, we go into our dict writer and say field names equals to field names. So this is basically saying, hey, these are the dictionary fields or the keys that we're going to be working with. Not necessarily the rows, but the keys that we're working with. So now when we write our row, we can use our own dictionary value in here. And we use those now keys. So ID being 1, 2, 3. And we can say title being new, string of new title. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And we're going to try and see if this works. So let's make sure terminal's opened up. And we're going to paste this in here. Looks like it worked okay. We won't know unless we look at the CSV file, and sure enough, we look at that, and there you've got it. So we actually do have the correct data. Now, of course, if I change this to just being W, it will override everything that's in there with the new data. I paste that in there, and it's 15 bytes, and notice that the new data is, well, it's only the one row. It doesn't actually have the titles on it, and the titles are something that I want. So let's go back into our CSV file, and at the very top, we'll do writer.write header, parentheses, and we'll try this again. Paste it in there, and what do we've got? We now have our header showing up. So cool. So that is definitely a little bit more functional of a way to use CSV files. So now what we need to do is actually put this into a function or some sort of file that's going to go through a CSV file and see some data about it. And that's actually things that we'll do in the next one. So if you have questions on the basic stuff of what we did with the CSV files, I definitely recommend that you check out the documentation because it does cover this and you can read a lot more about it in particular. And I want you to try out some of these things that are also there. So in the next one, or tomorrow, what we're going to do is actually build a function that handles a CSV file or handles our data actually by, we can add people to it, much like you would in a database, and then we're also going to go through that data and make changes to it if we need to, such as like we sent an email or whatever. So yeah, if you have any questions on this, let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.